Welcome to the Introverted Misfit podcast with me, Caroline Smith, where we discuss topics related to the human experience of connection and communication with a slightly awkward introverted twist. At any point in your life, or possibly even right now, you've probably told yourself one or more of the following things about yourself as an autistic or just a very socially awkward person. Nobody likes me. Nobody wants to be my friend. I'd rather be alone than keep getting rejected for who I am. Why should I have to change myself just so that other people will like me? The concept of being quote unquote likable is a sore spot for many misfits who don't really fit into what's considered normal social behavior, including myself at one point in my life. And what I'm implying here when I say be likable is what is known among ASD level 1 people as masking. Or if you're not autistic and you're just socially awkward, you might call it being socially palatable or conforming to social norms and expectations. Whatever you want to call it, it can feel like you are putting on a performance for people just so that they will want to be your friend, which of course is not a great feeling to have about yourself. In fact, some people are so fed up with putting on this performance that they have chosen a life of seclusion and emotional withdrawal because they have been so scarred by social exclusion, rejection, and even outright bullying for simply behaving in a way that's natural for them. I even did a poll on Facebook among some neurodivergent adults on the autism spectrum, asking what their initial reaction was to this phrase, be more likable. And I wanted to share with you a few key points that sum up the general consensus of the responses. So some people felt like they shouldn't have to adapt to other people's conveniences. Some people expressed that they shut down and feel rejected in response to this sentiment of being more likable. A lot of people said that they have felt like they've been told to be likable their entire lives, and they no longer feel obligated to conform to neurotypical expectations at their own expense. A few people said they interpreted this phrase to mean stop being yourself and instead be who everyone else wants you to be, which is a fair assumption. One person expressed that if someone said that to them, they would feel resentment for that person for a long time. Many people said that they feel resentment about the fact that communication always has to be on their terms. They're referring to non-autistic people's social norms. And then a lot of people felt really angry and frustrated because they feel like even though they have tried their best to get it right, it seems like they just always get it wrong. And there were actually a couple of hundred responses last time I checked the Facebook poll, but those are just some of the general feelings that I gathered from all of them. So it's obvious to me that many people feel very sensitively about this topic, and I certainly understand why. Nobody wants to feel like they are putting on a front just to be liked and appreciated. We all want to be loved and valued for who we are without feeling like we have to change too much of who we are. Well, I've got some bad news for you that I'm really hoping does not land the wrong way when I say it. That is not how the real world works, not even for non-autistic people. All of us walking on this earth to some extent are compromising something that we want to do or that we would rather be doing in order to make the relationships in our lives work. So then, why does this concept of being likable strike such a chord specifically with misfits, autistic people, socially awkward people? I think that all of those years that we've gone through of being constantly rejected for those little things and behaviors that were apparently not so little to non-autistic people has made it so that you have a very deep and painful reaction to this word likable. So just hearing that word immediately makes your heart drop and you feel this really big, heavy weight just being dropped on your shoulders. Just that one word alone, likable, feels like you as a person are being rejected all over again, just like in grade school and just like in all of those other social gatherings where you just couldn't get it right. So, in today's podcast episode, I'm going to do my best to get you out of this heavy feeling that you are having around this word likable. So, I'm going to talk about how to be likable without being fake or without compromising who you are. But first, I just need to clarify that when I refer to autistic people, I'm referring to people with low support needs and who are more able to mask their autistic traits. I'm just putting that out there so that this message doesn't come across the wrong way. So I want to start off with a very important mindset shift that you must be willing to make or at least consider if any of my later advice is going to hold any weight with you. And this is the mindset. You are not changing who you are at your core. You are communicating in a way that others will better understand and be receptive to. So if you were not even somewhat open to having this shift in perspective, everything else that I say from this point on probably just going to sound like a personal attack. And I don't mean it to sound like that. Um, so I'm sure that you've heard this saying that communication is a two-way street, which basically means that everyone involved in an interaction or a relationship has to be able to understand the other, which means that everyone has to speak and listen to each other for a successful exchange of ideas. That's really where the breakdown in communication happens between autistic people and non-autistic people. And among autistic people, this barrier is commonly referred to as the double empathy problem, which is a theory that suggests both autistic and non-autistic people struggle to understand each other's emotions and intentions. So, for example, as an autistic person myself, I know that I tend to exhibit what's commonly referred to as the flat effect, which involves a reduced ability to express emotions. And for me, this means that if I'm not 100% on top of it, I will have a very monotone voice and a lack of facial expressions. And from my perspective, I'm not doing anything wrong, and it's not necessarily a reflection of my interest level. So, like, if my face looks like I'm not showing any expression, it doesn't mean that I'm not interested. But to a non autistic person, it may look like I'm not having a good time, or that I'm bored, or maybe that I'm a psychopath. So, that's one example of where a common misunderstanding can happen. So if I were to intentionally change my facial expressions and my vocal inflection to match what I wish to express and what I wish the other person could understand, and I do, by the way, I do compensate or compromise by making up for the flat effect. I am not changing who I am at my core. I'm communicating in a way in which the other person can better understand me. So, to give you another example, I also have a tendency to be very blunt and direct in my communication, even if the topic is a really sensitive one that needs to be handled with more care. But I know that using that kind of blunt communication all of the time without any filter is not going to be received well in every situation. So if I want the other person to be more willing to listen to me, I know I need to have some control over my directness and my bluntness. And again, this is not changing who I am or what my true thoughts are. I'm just communicating it in a way that the other person is going to receive it a little better and is going to better understand it. So after you get past that mindset shift, we need to answer this question. So this is the point number 2 in this episode. What are you willing to compromise on? So, like I mentioned before, everyone, even non-autistic people, have to compromise on something in order to relate to one another better. So, like how many non-autistic people do you know in your life who got married and then went through a really messy divorce, or maybe they're still married and they're, or, just together and they're just miserable, all because they don't know how to communicate and compromise. Or if you've ever heard the term of code switching, that is an act of changing the way you speak, behave, or present yourself in different situations. So essentially, you are only revealing certain sides of your personality based on the situation and appropriate the level of appropriateness for that situation. So in other words, you're compromising something in order to be socially accepted. So, like the way that you present yourself in a professional work setting is going to be different than at a casual barbecue with your friends and family. Or the way that you talk to your parents is going to be different than how you talk to your siblings. Or the way that you behave at a funeral, which is typically a sad occasion, that's going to be different than how you behave at a wedding or at a party. So, this concept of compromising, it may be a little more difficult for us autistic people or socially awkward people for different reasons. But the point that I'm trying to make is that at some point, you and everyone else is going to have to compromise on something if you want healthy, thriving relationships. So I'll give you another example here. When I was still in grade school, mainly middle and high school, I really needed to have complete quiet so that I could really focus on my work. And because my sensory issues were really bad. And honestly, I still struggle with them quite a bit sometimes. But one thing that my parents used to do all of the time that drove me crazy when I was studying at home was walk around opening and closing doors and cabinets, moving stuff around, talking on the phone, and just making a bunch of small noises that really messed with my focus. So I had a habit of getting up and immediately leaving the room every time one of them would enter the room. And my parents had to explain to me that when you get up and leave abruptly like that without any explanation, it can actually make people feel like you don't want them around and you don't even want to be in the same room as them, which can be very insulting. So ever since they told me that, I have to really concentrate on not making the other person feel like I'm avoiding them at all costs by just abruptly leaving the room every time they enter it. Because, if you do that consistently enough, they're going to think that you don't like them and you don't want to be around them. So instead, I literally have to pause for a second and just take a second to calmly explain that I'm working on something that I need to focus on and I need a quiet place to do that. So I'm just going to go to the other room. That simple pause and short explanation of why I'm leaving the room instead of just abruptly leaving is a compromise that I try to make. I don't always get it right, but I do try to make it so that other people don't feel like they're a bother to me. So, another example of a compromise that you might have to make is engaging in small talk. And I know for a fact that many of you listening to this right now have a big gripe with small talk because I had done another Facebook poll just a few days ago asking what people's biggest social struggles are in preparation for this podcast episode. And I saw small talk being mentioned in the comments or some variation of small talk or conversational skills at least 15 times. So I know that this is a common one. Small talk is one of those things that if you don't know how to do it the right way, it can be very nerve-wracking. And that's why many autistic and awkward people really don't like it, or some of them even despise it. But as I have found in my life, small talk is very useful for initiating conversations that may or may not turn into deeper conversations. It relieves the tension of those awkward silences. So, like those few minutes that you're sitting there before a team meeting at work is going to start, and you're both just sitting there and staring at each other, or staring at the table, or staring at the ceiling, or staring at the floor, just like obviously avoiding each other's eye contact, that little awkward moment, it helps with those. And it's also good filler for when you're just getting to know people who you don't know, and you don't really know if you're compatible enough with them to be talking about deeper conversation, deeper topics yet. Or say you're at a very happy occasion, like a holiday party, and you want to maintain the festive mood, so you would engage in small talk and light conversation with people. You're not just going to start trauma dumping on people who you don't even know. Number one, because you don't know how they're going to perceive you when you do that. And then also, you don't know if you might be triggering something in them. Maybe they have some kind of trauma that they're into. You don't want to just come right out and just start talking about all of these deep philosophical questions, especially if you don't know them. So that's the importance of small talk. And knowing how to do small talk the right way, it doesn't mean that you have to do it all of the time, but it does mean that you will feel more comfortable in certain social settings. And if you are looking for some quick tips on how to engage in small talk, by the way, you can grab my free 6 step guide to small talk for awkward introverts using the link in the description, or you can just go directly to theintrovertedmisfit.com/resources and you'll find that same free guide plus all of my other free downloadables and audio guides specifically for shy and awkward introverts. So that was my second point. Figure out what you are and what you are not willing to compromise on so that you can make those important relationships in your life work. And my last point is to find the right people, i.e., stop trying to fit in where you are not welcome. No matter how nice and likable you try to be, not everyone is going to be um, compatible with you. Not everyone is going to like you in the same way that you're not going to like everybody who crosses your path. There are just some people out there who are not going to fit in with your personality, your interests, your morals, your values for a whole bunch of different reasons. So maybe they are very superficial and vain. And so the moment that you say something a little awkward or uncool and that mask starts to slip a little bit, you're immediately kicked out of the club, which is no fun because I've definitely been there. Or maybe they are particularly catty and gossipy, and that's not really behavior that you like to engage in a lot. Whatever the reason is, don't try to fit in with people who are just determined to not understand you. And that's assuming that you're already enacting that second point that we just went over, which is finding your compromises to improve your communication. So if you're already doing that, you're already finding your compromises and enacting them, and people are still set on misunderstanding you or just going to toss you aside for those little mistakes and awkward moments that you have. Stop trying to fit in with those people. I remember being in middle school trying to, I want to say trying to fit in with the popular kids at school, but it wasn't really that I was trying to fit in because I already knew that I was not cool enough to be, like to talk to them and to hang out with them. But at the time, I guess I just kind of lacked self-awareness about why people didn't really like me, mainly because I didn't get my autism diagnosis until I was 17. So I think I was a junior in high school at that time. So I would just really try to talk to a lot of different people, including the popular kids. Like I would just try to talk to anybody just to see if they were willing to talk to me. And I did not learn this until much later on in life. But if you want to hang with those quote unquote cool kids, and I say quote unquote cool kids because those cool kids a lot of times grow up to be, I guess, cool adults or very cliquish, catty and gossipy adults, the mask that you have to keep up with them is like 10 times more difficult to do than just uh, I guess uncool people because remember they are going to care a lot about superficial things. So like how you look, how you behave, what clothes you're wearing, etc. And that makes you more disposable when your mask eventually does slip up every once in a while and you say something a little awkward or a little bit off-putting or say something that gets taken the wrong way, you're out of the club. So I would say focus on finding friends who are not so superficial and who will not be so put off by those little slip ups that you have every now and then and who understand your need for alone time when you're feeling overwhelmed or overstimulated, and who just understand you. And those are really the three main things that I advise you need to do in order to be likable. So, number one is remember this mindset shift that you're not changing who you are at your core. You are communicating in a way that others will better understand and be receptive to. That's number one. Number two, figure out what you are and are not willing to compromise on in terms of your behavior and conversational skills and things like that. And number three, fit in with the right kind of people. So people who understand you and who are not so superficial. And when you can nail those three things, you will become someone that people, the right kind of people, like to be around. So all of that was sort of the short version of it because of course the process of becoming likable is not an overnight process. But if you are a listener of mine who is shy, awkward, or even if you're an autistic introvert like I am, I know that even these three steps that look really good on paper and sound really good can be very daunting to accomplish in real life, especially by yourself. And that's what I'm here for. So, in addition to giving you all of this free advice from my lived experience as an introverted misfit on my podcast every week, I offer one on one services to help shy, awkward introverts become socially confident without having to act extroverted. So if you are an introvert listening to this episode right now and you find that your social life is being negatively affected by your lack of self-confidence, your fear of rejection and embarrassment, your fear of speaking to people or speaking in front of people, and your struggles with making and keeping friends, my program, Communicate with Quiet Confidence, will help you stop hiding behind your quiet, introverted personality and realize that your introversion can be your greatest communication strength that allows you to make very meaningful connections if you know how to use it the right way. So, up until this point, you've probably been made to feel as if you are not likable, or dare I say, unlovable, just for being who you are. And you have probably internalized that rejection a lot to mean that you are not worth anyone's attention and companionship. So instead of trying to get out there and find people who will accept you and who will understand you, you've just been sitting back and watching everyone else live a life that you could only dream of, all because you have been made to believe that you are not worth quality relationships. Well, I believe that if you want that life that's the opposite of what I just described, if you want that life where you have quality relationships and you can still socialize and maintain these relationships while taking care of your needs, I believe that you can have that life. It takes work and compromise, as we've gone over, while still being able to take care of your individual needs, but it is possible, all without having to fake being someone you're not. So if that sounds like a life that you want to create for yourself, you can take the next step towards that goal today. Book your free discovery call with me by using the link in the description, or if you want to learn all of the details about the program, Communicate with Quiet Confidence, you can go directly to theintrovertedmisfit.com/coaching, and you can read all of the information about it. You can see all of the frequently asked questions about the program, and then you can also book your free call with me when you get to that page. So I cannot wait to finally speak to you if you happen to be one of those listeners of mine who's going to book that free session with me. So that's all for today's episode. As always, if you enjoyed this talk, please don't forget to hit that follow or subscribe button, leave a review and or a comment, whether you're tuning in on YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts from, and make sure to share this podcast episode with a friend. Thanks for listening and have a great day.